Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today we're examining a case that began with a missing person report, evolved into a nationwide fugitive hunt, and became one of the most recognizable stories ever featured on true crime television.
It really is one of those cases that it just burrows into the public consciousness.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're going to walk through the events of April 1990 today. And, I want you to imagine the architecture of a lie right at its inception.
The very beginning of the cover-up.
Exactly. A man initiates contact with law enforcement, right? He presents himself as this concerned, completely baffled husband.
Right.
So Dennis DePue tells the authorities that his estranged wife, Marilynn, has vanished. He says this happened right following a meeting they had to, discuss personal matters regarding their separation.
Which is a very specific way to frame it.
It is. He attempts to frame the narrative immediately as this sudden, tragic, and just totally inexplicable disappearance.
And, the administrative camouflage of that initial contact is really worth dissecting.
Wait, administrative camouflage?
Yeah, think about it. A missing person report filed by an estranged partner in the immediate aftermath of a separation. It operates as a tactical maneuver rather than a genuine plea for assistance.
Right, like he's using the police report itself as a tool.
Exactly. The perpetrator is weaponizing the bureaucratic process of law enforcement. By initiating that paperwork, they attempt to dictate the tempo of the investigation.
Because they want the police looking in the wrong places.
Right. They want the police to spend the crucial first 24 hours searching hospitals, checking bus stations, or just, assuming the victim simply needed time away.
Wow.
It's an effort to establish themselves as a cooperating victim of circumstance.
Yeah.
And that buys them the necessary time to manage the physical evidence of their actual crime.
That makes the police report itself an extension of the abuse, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
It's a tool for gaslighting, only this time the target of the manipulation isn't the spouse, it's the state.
Precisely. The perpetrator hopes the inherent friction of police bureaucracy will act as a buffer.
But when you look at the mechanics of timeline reconstruction, that buffer only holds if the perpetrator's narrative exists in a vacuum. I mean, I'm curious about the logistical challenge investigators faced here. How quickly did they actually breach that administrative camouflage and realize this wasn't someone who just walked away?
Well, the structural integrity of Dennis DePue's narrative collapsed within a matter of hours.
Really?
That fast?
Oh, yeah. The buffer he attempted to create failed because he just couldn't control the variables outside his immediate physical grasp.
Right. The other people involved.
Exactly. Witness statements from their own children provided an immediate high-fidelity contradiction to his calm demeanor.
Which is terrifying when you think about what those kids had to say.
It's horrific. And when you combine credible eyewitness testimony of a violent abduction with the rapid discovery of irrefutable physical evidence at secondary locations, the investigative pivot is instantaneous.
So they didn't waste time on the missing person angle. No, the classification shifted from a missing person inquiry to an active homicide and fugitive apprehension protocol basically overnight. His attempt to manipulate the system was dismantled by the sheer volume of chaotic data he left in his wake.
The speed of that collapse is so directly tied to the people involved, which I think that requires us to examine the sociological environment of this crime.
Yeah, the setting is very important.
Right. So we are looking at Coldwater, Michigan in 1990. Dennis DePue was a 46-year-old property assessor.
A very stable, unremarkable profession.
Exactly. And Marilynn DePue was a highly respected high school counselor. On paper, you have the architecture of middle-class respectability. They had 3 children, Julie, Scott, and Jennifer.
The external facade is one of total civic stability.
And that often serves as a primary defense mechanism for domestic abusers, right? The community assumes that because the lawn is mowed and the taxes are paid, the interior life of the home must be equally ordered.
That's a very common, very dangerous assumption. The juxtaposition between that external respectability and the internal pathology of the DePue household is it's stark.
Because Dennis wasn't just a strict parent.
No, not at all. He operated with a profound baseline of paranoia and withdrawal. In behavioral analysis, we look at the specific mechanisms of coercive control.
Okay.
Dennis didn't just want to lead his family. He required absolute, unchallenged authority over their psychological and physical autonomy.
He had to control everything they did.
Everything. He systematically isolated himself from the emotional labor of the household while simultaneously demanding total obedience.
And what happens when a family naturally pushes back against that?
Well, when the family structure began to buckle under the weight of that authoritarianism, his psychological framework couldn't process the failure as his own.
So he blamed Marilynn.
Exactly. He employed a rigid projection mechanism, constantly accusing Marilynn of orchestrating a campaign to turn the children against him.
That projection strikes me as a closed-loop system.
Also,
Well, if he's the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by his wife, then any aggression he displays is internally justified as self-defense, right?
that is a brilliant way to put it. Yes, exactly.
So by 1989, Marilynn takes the necessary legal and physical steps to dismantle his control. She files for divorce, which is finalized in December of that year.
A very dangerous time for her.
Incredibly dangerous. She asserts her independence and establishes physical boundaries, specifically by changing the locks on the family home.
Right.
She is utilizing the legal and social tools available to protect herself and her children from that closed-loop system of control.
And you have to understand, changing the locks is a profound assertion of territorial autonomy.
It's drawing a literal line in the sand.
Yes. And in the psychology of an abuser, it triggers what behavioral specialists term an extinction burst.
An extinction burst?
Yeah. When the standard methods of coercive control no longer yield the desired compliance, the abuser's behavior doesn't simply stop. It radically escalates in frequency and intensity.
So things get much, much worse before they get better.
Exactly. And Dennis's reaction to the changed locks illustrates this perfectly. He refused to acknowledge the legal or physical boundary.
He just ignored it.
Completely. On one documented occasion, Marilynn returned to her locked home to find Dennis simply sitting on the living room couch.
Oh, wow. Just sitting there.
Just sitting there. He had broken in just to occupy the space.
If we look at that through the lens of systems theory, he's treating the household like a malfunctioning thermostat.
Right.
He feels his control slipping, so his internal wiring demands he bypass the new security protocols to just reset the temperature of the house to his liking.
That's a great analogy.
He isn't sitting on that couch to have a conversation. He is engaging in a localized insurgency.
Yes, a very quiet, terrifying insurgency.
He's communicating that the deed to the house, the divorce decree, the new locks, they are all minor administrative errors that he is choosing to ignore. The sheer psychological weight of finding him there must have been suffocating for Marilynn.
The intention was to suffocate her sense of safety. It's a nonverbal declaration of ownership. And this escalating trajectory of boundary violation inevitably looks for a flashpoint.
Which usually happens when?
Often during periods of disrupted routine. Which brings the timeline to Easter Sunday, April 15th, 1990.
Holidays are always tough.
They introduce a massive influx of systemic stress. Routines are altered, familial expectations are heightened, and the illusion of normalcy is forced upon a fractured dynamic. Dennis arrived at the house under the pretense of picking up the children for a visitation.
And the children themselves serve as the most accurate barometer for the ambient threat level in that house.
Kids always know.
They really do. They possessed an acute situational awareness that the adults in the community might have lacked. Julie, the younger daughter, overtly refused to leave with him.
She knew something was wrong.
Yeah. Scott, the son, engaged in deliberate stalling tactics. They recognized the volatility of the environment.
And their reluctance acts as the catalyst for the violence that follows.
Right. Not because they did anything wrong.
No, of course not.
No.
But because their refusal was a direct challenge to Dennis's remaining illusion of authority.
So they won't go. And what happens?
Their resistance shattered the facade he was trying to maintain on a holiday. Deprived of compliance from his children, Dennis's internalized rage immediately redirected toward his primary target, Marilynn.
And it escalates fast.
The escalation was instantaneous and explosive. He physically attacked her, forcing her down a flight of stairs.
That's awful.
The violence at the bottom of the staircase was sustained and brutal, occurring in direct view of the children who were, pleading with him to stop.
They were watching the whole thing.
Yes. He was enforcing his dominance through absolute physical terror, forever traumatizing his children by linking their mother's suffering to his loss of control.
And amidst that chaotic violence, the oldest daughter, Jennifer, alters the entire trajectory of the event.
She was incredibly brave.
She really was. She breaks out of the physical space of the trauma and sprints to a neighbor's house to initiate a call to law enforcement.
Which is huge.
If we look at the timeline of the investigation, that specific action is the primary structural vulnerability in Dennis's plan.
Oh, absolutely.
It initiates the police response clock before he has even secured the scene. He's robbed of the operational time required to orchestrate a clean disappearance.
Jennifer's flight introduced an uncontrollable variable into his localized insurgency, as you called it. He recognized immediately that the perimeter was breached.
The cops are coming.
Right. The arrival of law enforcement was no longer a theoretical risk. It was an impending certainty. This forced an immediate, disorganized tactical shift.
So what does he do?
He abducted the severely injured Marilynn, forcing her into his 1984 Chevy van, and delivered a final, manipulative narrative to his traumatized children.
A lie about the hospital.
Yes, claiming he was transporting their mother to a hospital to seek medical attention.
That specific lie, the hospital claim, is fascinating because it shows a mind desperately trying to maintain administrative camouflage, even while fleeing a violent crime scene.
Even in a panic, he's trying to control the spin.
He is still trying to control the data flow, but the geographical shift is what exposes him completely. The narrative moves 12 miles outside of Coldwater onto Snow Prairie Road.
And this is where things get truly bizarre.
I really want to examine the intersection of two completely different realities here. On one side, you have Ray and Marie Thornton.
Just a normal couple.
Right. They're an ordinary couple engaged in a leisurely Sunday drive, playing a mundane game where they create slogans out of the letters on passing license plates. They represent the baseline of normal societal function.
The Thorntons are operating in a state of low cognitive load, observing their environment without any anticipation of threat.
Which creates a stark contrast when they cross paths with Dennis.
Exactly. When the system of Dennis DePue's panic violently intersects with their tranquility. DePue is operating in a state of extreme physiological hyperarousal.
Right, adrenaline is through the roof.
He has committed an atrocity, his timeline has been accelerated by his daughter's escape, and he is driving a highly recognizable vehicle at unsafe speeds. The erratic nature of his flight is what initially registers on the Thorntons' radar.
Marie Thornton catches the first two letters of his aggressively speeding Van GZ and makes a passing joke about his hurry.
She said, "GZ's in a hurry."
Yeah, exactly. It's just an ambient observation. But the geographical layout of Snow Prairie Road forces a second, far more significant visual encounter.
Because they catch up to him.
Right. As the Thorntons proceed down the rural route, they approach an abandoned schoolhouse. The architecture of the environment is crucial here.
It's very isolated.
It is desolate, allowing any anomaly to stand out sharply. They observe the same Chevy van parked suspiciously near the decaying structure.
The human brain is highly attuned to pattern disruption. A speeding van is a minor disruption. That same van parked erratically at an abandoned structure in a remote area. That is a major anomaly.
And as they observe the scene, the visual data becomes increasingly difficult to process.
Because of what Marie sees.
Right. Marie Thornton observes the driver walking toward the rear of the schoolhouse carrying a large white sheet that is heavily saturated with blood.
Just think about the cognitive dissonance of processing that image while engaged in a Sunday drive. It requires a rapid recalibration of their understanding of reality.
It's the ultimate collision of the mundane and the macabre, and this is where the behavioral mechanics of the perpetrator become highly irregular.
Because Dennis realizes he's been spotted.
Yes, Dennis DePue realizes he is being observed. Now, I feel like a standard evasion model would suggest that a perpetrator attempting to dispose of physical evidence would prioritize immediate departure in the opposite direction.
Right, to minimize exposure, flee the scene.
Exactly. Instead, Dennis abandons his immediate task, returns to his vehicle, and initiates a high-speed pursuit of the witnesses.
He goes after them.
He tailgates the Thorntons aggressively for 2 miles. Why does a man trying to hide from the law draw massive, potentially lethal attention to his vehicle by using it to assault 2 random civilians on a highway?
Well, applying a rational evasion model to Dennis DePue ignores the specific pathology of his personality.
Because he's not rational.
No, he is not a strategic criminal calculating risk and reward. He's an authoritarian abuser whose core psychological architecture relies on immediate intimidation to neutralize perceived threats.
So they weren't just witnesses to him.
The Thorntons were not merely witnesses in his mind. They were challengers to his operational control. His localized insurgency had moved from his living room to Snow Prairie Road.
That is chilling.
His instinct wasn't to hide, but to dominate. He used his van as a kinetic weapon to inflict the same coercive fear upon strangers that he'd utilized for years against his own family.
Wow.
He needed them to feel terrified so that he could feel secure.
That reframes the entire pursuit. He is projecting his domestic terrorism outward onto the highway. He wants to enforce silence through the application of trauma. The Thorntons are subjected to a profound psychological assault, unsure if they are about to be run off the road and murdered.
It must have been terrifying.
But they eventually manage to turn off the main highway, and the pursuit abruptly ceases. DePue pulls his van to the shoulder.
And this is where the Thorntons do something incredible.
This is the moment where their civic programming overrides their biological imperative for flight. They make the calculated, highly dangerous decision to turn their vehicle around to secure the full alphanumeric sequence of his license plate.
Their decision is a remarkable display of cognitive override.
They knew they had to get that plate.
They recognized that the anomaly they witnessed required state intervention, and they accepted the personal risk necessary to secure the actionable intelligence the police would need.
So brave.
But when they approached the van for the second time, the situational dynamic has shifted again.
Because he's not chasing them anymore.
Right. The immediate necessity of intimidation has passed for DePue, replaced by the mechanical requirement of evasion. The Thorntons observe him calmly crouched at the rear of the vehicle, physically altering the license plate.
The rapid cycling between homicidal rage and calm mechanical task management is deeply unsettling.
It shows how compartmentalized his mind was.
But as they pass the vehicle, the visual confirmation of the crime is absolute. The front passenger door of the Chevy van is standing open, and the interior is visibly soaked in blood.
There's no mistaking it now.
The abstraction of the bloody sheet is replaced by the concrete reality of a mobile crime scene. The Thorntons immediately proceed back to the schoolhouse, utilizing the location as an anchor point to contact authorities.
Right, to call the police.
And when they arrive, they discover the bloody sheet partially forced into an animal burrow near the foundation of the structure.
The physical mechanics of that disposal really highlight the disorganized nature of his flight.
He just shoved it in a hole.
Yeah, he's utilizing environmental features, an animal hole, rather than a prepared site. This spontaneous disposal method is highly vulnerable to discovery.
Especially with the police already on the way.
Exactly. The macroscopic timeline of the investigation is rapidly converging on their location. The Michigan State Police are already deploying resources based on the initial emergency call from Jennifer DePue.
So all the pieces are coming together.
The data points from the domestic disturbance and the highway encounter are synthesizing into a single, cohesive manhunt.
And when law enforcement secures the schoolhouse, the forensic reality completely obliterates Dennis's initial narrative of a simple disappearance.
There's no talking his way out of this.
We are looking at 1990 forensic capabilities, but the physical evidence is not just suggestive, it is concrete.
It is undeniable.
The saturation of the sheet provides serological data, while the soft soil around the schoolhouse captures the distinct geometric wear patterns of the van's tire treads.
They have the vehicle type, the blood evidence, and the witness accounts.
But they do not have Marilynn. The spatial distribution of the crime scene expands the following day when a highway maintenance worker discovers Marilynn's body adjacent to a deserted road.
Geographically located between the Coldwater residence and the schoolhouse.
Right. She had suffered a single fatal gunshot wound to the back of the head.
And, the spatial distribution of the evidence, the abduction site, the body disposal site, and the secondary evidence disposal site at the schoolhouse, it indicates a reactive, highly erratic flight path.
He was improvising everything.
He was.
Yeah.
And the firearm introduces another layer of premeditation into the chaotic sequence. But the forensic reconstruction is absolute at this point.
The blood, the tires, the ballistics.
Yes. The blood typing from the sheet, the tire casting from the schoolhouse dirt, and the ballistic evidence all form an unbreakable chain of causality. There is zero ambiguity for the investigators.
The missing person file is permanently closed.
And the nationwide fugitive apprehension protocol is initiated.
This transition from a local domestic homicide to a nationwide fugitive hunt introduces a bizarre psychological artifact into the historical record.
The letters.
Yes, the letters. Dennis DePue, completely aware that he is the subject of a massive law enforcement dragnet, begins generating a paper trail.
Which is the last thing a fugitive should do.
He writes 17 detailed letters to various family members and associates, mailing them from disparate locations, including Virginia, Iowa, and Oklahoma.
Just drifting across the country.
This cross-country drift is accompanied by a staggering lack of self-awareness. I mean, the text of these letters does not read like a confession or a plea for forgiveness.
No, not at all.
It reads like a manifesto of grievance.
The linguistic analysis of those 17 letters provides a pristine view into the architecture of narcissistic injury.
How so? Like, what is he actually writing about?
The syntax is dominated by self-referential pronouns and victim-blaming structures. The actual murder of his wife is treated as an unfortunate environmental consequence of her own actions.
Like she forced his hand.
Exactly. He utilizes the letters to detail her supposed tricks and lies, attempting to litigate the terms of their divorce from the road.
He's still fighting the divorce.
Yes. He expresses profound resentment over the loss of his home, the alienation of his family, and the disruption of his retirement trajectory.
His retirement trajectory.
Right.
The audacity of complaining about your retirement plans after executing your wife in front of your children it's difficult to process.
It's deeply disconcerting.
He is demanding that his audience participate in his delusion. He wants them to read a letter postmarked from Oklahoma and conclude that the man who dumped a body on the side of a road in Michigan is actually the aggrieved party.
He desperately needed to be the victim.
It shows that his need to control the narrative, to be perceived as the righteous patriarch, was stronger than his instinct for survival.
Absolutely.
He is risking apprehension every time he approaches a postal drop because he just cannot tolerate being the villain of his own story.
That intolerance for ego dissonance is the defining characteristic of his flight.
Ego dissonant.
Yeah. To acknowledge the reality of his actions would cause a total psychological collapse. Therefore, his internal narrative engine works overtime to construct a reality where he was provoked, manipulated, and ultimately forced into a defensive action.
So he actually believed his own lies.
He genuinely believed that if he could just calibrate his argument correctly, if he could just explain the specific mechanics of his suffering in these letters, society would absolve him.
That is why
His capacity for cruelty was perfectly insulated by his capacity for self-delusion.
And he's marinating in that delusional victimhood as he drifts across the American South. Eventually, he settles into a new geographic and social camouflage.
He tries to start over.
We advance the timeline nearly a year to March 1991. DePue has relocated to Dallas, Texas. He has assumed a fraudulent identity operating under the alias Hank Queen.
Hank Queen.
Right. He has integrated himself into a new domestic routine, securing a residence and a new girlfriend. He is attempting to build a replica of the life he destroyed, right down to the mundane daily schedules.
But the external world is about to catch up with him.
Specifically, the media apparatus. They are about to breach his new perimeter.
The intersection of broadcast media and fugitive apprehension in the early 1990s represents a significant shift in law enforcement capabilities.
Because of television.
Exactly. The case was selected for broadcast on the television program Unsolved Mysteries.
Which was huge back then.
Massive. And this wasn't merely entertainment, it was the deployment of a highly effective surveillance tool.
They turned the viewers into detectives.
The program utilized dramatic reenactments, specific vehicular details, and clear photographic identification to transform millions of passive viewers into an active intelligence network.
And the synchronization of that event is crucial. You have tens of millions of people sitting in their living rooms receiving the exact same data packet at the exact same time.
Right.
And in one of those living rooms in Dallas, the tension is reaching a breaking point.
Because of his new girlfriend.
DePue's new girlfriend arrives at their residence. She immediately registers an anomaly. His 1984 Chevy van is parked openly in the driveway, completely contrary to his rigid habit of concealing it within the garage.
Which tells you how panicked he was.
She enters the home to find Hank in a state of poorly concealed panic. He claims a sudden family medical emergency requires his immediate departure.
The behavioral indicators of his panic are clear, but he still attempts to employ minor control tactics.
Like keeping her busy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He urgently directs his girlfriend into the kitchen under the guise of preparing food for his journey.
Make me some sandwiches.
Right. The sandwich request is a crude spatial management technique. He requires her physical absence from the primary living space because he needs to monitor the television screen without her observing his reaction.
She's watching the broadcast.
He is attempting to manage the flow of information in his physical environment while simultaneously watching his national camouflage disintegrate on the broadcast.
The cognitive load of that specific moment is extraordinary.
It has to be overwhelming.
He is attempting to maintain the vocal tone and physical posture of a normal man named Hank experiencing a family emergency, while internally processing the reality that an actor is reenacting his murder of Marilyn on national television.
And giving out all his details.
The broadcast is detailing his specific methods, displaying his actual face, and identifying the exact make and model of the van sitting in the driveway. The localized control he exerted over his Dallas household is vaporizing in real time.
The psychological pressure of observing your own exposure must be categorized as a form of acute trauma for a narcissist.
Acute trauma, really.
Absolutely. His entire survival strategy was predicated on anonymity and control. The broadcast stripped him of both simultaneously.
Everyone suddenly knows who he is.
He is watching the walls of his reality collapse, understanding that anyone, a neighbor, a gas station attendant, a coworker, could be watching the same frequency and connecting the data points to him.
But he runs.
He executed a rapid extraction, fleeing the residents in the van and leaving his bewildered girlfriend behind.
And his panic is entirely justified by the structural reality of the broadcast. The network was operating a synchronized tip line, and the intelligence gathering was instantaneous.
It worked incredibly fast.
An acquaintance of the girlfriend, who was aware of Hank and his vehicle, observed the broadcast and immediately recognized the correlation.
They put it all together.
They supplied law enforcement with the critical missing data point: the fraudulent Texas license plate currently affixed to the Chevy van.
That was the missing piece.
The broadcast had successfully bridged the geographic gap between the Michigan crime scene and the Texas hideout in a matter of hours.
The efficiency of that information transfer catalyzed a multi-state tactical response.
The police knew exactly what they were looking for.
Law enforcement agencies were no longer searching for a ghost. They possessed real-time data regarding his vehicle, his direction of travel, and his psychological state.
He was a highly agitated fugitive operating a known vehicle on federal interstate systems.
A very dangerous combination.
The geography of his flight path takes him east, crossing from Texas into Louisiana. The tactical net tightens precisely 4 hours after his departure from Dallas.
They caught up to him fast.
Louisiana State Police units identify the Chevy van based on the broadcast intelligence. They initiate a traffic stop, which DePue immediately rejects.
He's not going quietly.
This initiates a highly dangerous 15-mile vehicular pursuit that crosses state jurisdictions, moving rapidly from Louisiana into Warren County, Mississippi.
It's a miracle no one else was hurt.
The physical mechanics of a high-speed chase involving an aging, top-heavy van and multiple specialized police interceptors dictate a violent resolution.
The evasion attempt was a final, desperate assertion of autonomy.
Because he couldn't stand being caught.
Dennis DePue had structured his entire existence around the requirement of control. The flashing lights in his rearview mirror represented the absolute, undeniable termination of that control.
He had nowhere left to run.
Surrender would necessitate submission to an external authority, the justice system, and force him to publicly confront the reality of his actions without the protective shield of his delusion.
Which we know he couldn't handle.
Given his psychological profile, peaceful submission was highly improbable. He required a mechanism to retain final authority over his own narrative.
And the tactical situation resolves at 4 a.m.
In Mississippi.
Right. Sheriff's deputies have established a hard roadblock ahead of his position. They utilize lethal force against the vehicle itself, shooting out the rear tires of the van to eliminate its mobility.
They forced him to stop.
The vehicle decelerates violently, and a kinetic exchange ensues. DePue fires upon the responding officers, attempting to utilize his crippled vehicle as a battering ram to breach the containment line.
He's fighting to the bitter end.
When the forward momentum is finally arrested and the tactical teams approach the van, they find that DePue has executed his final act of control.
He took his own life.
He is deceased behind the steering wheel, having inflicted a fatal gunshot wound upon himself. The weapon, a heavy caliber revolver, is recovered from his left hand with his thumb resting on the trigger.
His suicide is the ultimate manifestation of his pathology.
How so?
Faced with the certainty of capture, exposure, and institutional subjugation, he chose self-termination to avoid accountability.
So it wasn't remorse.
Not at all. He evaded the legal mechanisms of the state, but the physical reality of his containment forced a collapse of his ego. The violence he had consistently directed outward was finally turned inward when all other avenues of control were severed.
The physical pursuit ends in Mississippi, but the narrative of the case undergoes a significant evolution as it enters the public domain.
Because there was no trial.
Right. The legal system was denied the opportunity to process the evidence in a court of law. When a high-profile case concludes without a trial, the analysis naturally migrates into the cultural sphere.
People want to understand what happened.
Exactly. I want to examine how this specific timeline is dissected in modern internet theories and true crime communities.
It's discussed quite a bit.
The early assumption of a missing person is highly criticized today, but the focus has shifted entirely toward the mechanics of the domestic violence.
And rightly so. The contemporary analysis of the DePue case is remarkably sophisticated.
Why do you think that is?
Largely because public understanding of domestic abuse has evolved from focusing solely on physical violence to recognizing the preceding architecture of coercive control.
So we see the red flags earlier now?
True crime analysts utilize this case as a primary educational model. They dissect his financial control, his social isolation of Marilyn, and his weaponization of paranoia.
All the things he did before he ever got physical.
Yes. More importantly, the case serves as a grim statistical validation regarding the lethality of the separation period.
When did you change the locks?
The data clearly indicates that the attempt to leave an abuser is the moment of maximum physical danger, and Marilyn's decision to change the locks is analyzed as the specific trigger for the fatal escalation.
It shifts the dialogue from asking, why didn't she leave, to understanding that leaving is what initiates the lethal response.
It's a crucial shift in perspective.
The public dissection of the case also heavily focuses on the media sociology of the apprehension. The Unsolved Mysteries broadcast is continually referenced as a watershed moment in crowdsourced justice.
It was revolutionary for the time.
The internet looks back at 1991 and recognizes the broadcast as the analog precursor to modern digital sleuthing.
Right, like an early form of Reddit or web sleuthing.
Exactly. The mechanics of putting a fugitive's face in millions of homes simultaneously is a fascinating study in media power.
The broadcast functioned as a force multiplier for law enforcement.
A force multiplier.
Yeah, prior to that integration, a fugitive's primary advantage was the geographical fragmentation of police intelligence.
Because states didn't talk to each other as much?
Right. A warrant in Michigan meant very little to a patrol officer in Texas unless a specific inquiry was made.
But TV changed that.
The television program bypassed the fragmented police networks and delivered the intelligence directly to the civilian population surrounding the fugitive. It democratized the surveillance apparatus.
That is a fascinating way to look at it.
The psychological impact on a perpetrator, knowing that any civilian encounter could lead to apprehension, fundamentally alters their ability to operate securely.
And that intersection of civilian observation and criminal terror takes a highly unusual turn a decade later.
Oh yes, the movie.
The cultural memory of the DePue case was fractured and reassembled by Hollywood. For the horror demographic, the narrative of Ray and Marie Thornton's Easter Sunday Drive is deeply familiar.
Because it's almost a shot-for-shot recreation.
It really is. It was utilized as the structural foundation for the opening sequence of the 2001 film Jeepers Creepers.
A very famous sequence.
The translation from grounded true crime to supernatural horror is a frequent topic of debate on platforms like Reddit.
The filmmaker extracted the specific mechanical tension of the Thorntons' encounter while discarding the sociological context.
Right, the domestic violence aspect is gone.
The cinematic sequence replicates the visual data almost exactly. You have the rural road, the license plate game, the aggressive tailgating by a rusted van, The observation of a figure depositing a wrapped shape down a pipe near an abandoned structure, and the terrifying realization of being observed by the perpetrator.
It's all there.
The visual vocabulary is identical, but the antagonist is replaced by a supernatural entity.
This transition raises a fascinating analytical question about how we process trauma through media.
It's a complex ethical question.
When you strip the context of a very real, very lethal domestic homicide, the murder of Marilynn DePue, and use the mechanics of its cover-up to introduce a flying monster, does that fundamentally degrade the historical reality of the victim?
That's the debate, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, is it an unethical abstraction of real human suffering? Or is there an argument that translating the mechanics of the fear into a broader cultural artifact ensures the underlying terror of the event is permanently archived in the public consciousness?
The ethical tension is significant, frankly.
Where do you land on it?
Well, abstracting Dennis DePue into a literal monster removes the critical educational value of the case. A demon with wings does not teach society about the warning signs of coercive control or the danger of the separation period.
It erases Marilyn's story.
It obscures Marilyn's specific suffering. However, from a psychological perspective, the cinematic adaptation isolates and immortalizes the pure visceral reality of the Thornton's highway encounter.
The fear is preserved.
Exactly. The reason the cinematic sequence is highly effective is precisely because the inciting incident is grounded in a plausible reality.
It works because the monster's initial behavior mimics the actions of a violent human.
The supernatural elements are secondary.
They are secondary to the immediate mechanical threat of a large vehicle operated by a hostile intelligence on a deserted road.
Which is a very real fear.
The terror the Thorntons experienced wasn't theoretical. It was the absolute vulnerability of being targeted by a localized insurgency. We are highly unlikely to encounter a supernatural creature, but the statistical probability of intersecting with a human being pushed to the edge of violence, operating a vehicle erratically, is a tangible, worldly fear.
The movie leverages the true crime reality to bypass our logical defenses.
Right.
Precisely. The adaptation captures the emotional frequency of the event, even as it abandons the factual data.
But when we return to the factual data to conclude our analysis of the case, we must examine the specific investigative pivot that resolved the timeline.
The initial police response.
Why did the initial administrative camouflage of the missing person report fail to protect Dennis DePue for more than a few hours?
It requires an understanding of how law enforcement synthesizes contradictory data streams.
The investigation succeeded because the structural hierarchy of evidence was properly applied. In previous eras, the patriarchal narrative of the husband might have been granted days of unchallenged authority.
They might have just taken his word for it.
The police might have assumed marital friction and delayed a physical search. But in this timeline, the investigators utilized a comparative analysis.
They weighed the different accounts against each other.
They weighed the calm, bureaucratic tone of Dennis's phone call against the high-stress, physiological panic of Jennifer's flight to the neighbor's house.
And they trusted the child.
The child's terror was recognized as a more reliable indicator of reality than the adult's composure.
The prioritization of the child's behavioral data over the adult's verbal narrative was the critical first step.
And the second step.
The immediate integration of external civilian intelligence. When the Thorntons supplied the geographic coordinates of the schoolhouse, the investigation moved from theoretical timeline reconstruction to physical forensic analysis.
They had a real crime scene.
The physical evidence, the serological data on the sheet, the plaster casting of the tire treads, operates outside of human narrative.
Evidence doesn't lie.
Blood saturation and geometric treadwear do not possess an agenda. They provide an objective anchor to the timeline, rendering any deceptive phone calls entirely obsolete.
This provides a concrete lesson regarding the management of initial reports.
For both police and the public.
The procedural takeaway is the necessity of radical skepticism when processing missing person claims filed by a partner during a period of domestic instability.
You can't just take it at face value.
The administrative filing must be viewed as a potential symptom of the crime itself. The statistical reality demands that resources be deployed immediately to verify the physical environment, rather than waiting for the passage of time to confirm the absence.
Because time is usually what the killer wants.
The highest probability of lethality exists in the immediate window of separation, and the investigative response must match that urgency.
And the secondary lesson concerns the structural necessity of civilian intervention.
The bystanders.
Yes. Dennis DePue's operational plan was entirely dependent on a lack of friction from the environment. He assumed he could control the children, process the evidence in isolation, and manipulate the police.
But the people around him didn't comply.
The architecture of his timeline was shattered by ordinary individuals choosing to accept personal risk.
Like Jennifer and the Thorntons.
The child running for help, the couple turning their vehicle around to secure a license plate, these are acts of profound civic engagement.
They changed everything.
Without those specific interventions, the perpetrator secures the necessary time to launder the evidence and solidify his alibi.
The civilian intervention is the friction that destroyed the machine. It highlights the recurring theme of the case, the profound vulnerability of our daily routines.
The story resonates because it demonstrates the minimal distance between absolute normalcy and chaotic violence.
The Thorntons were playing a word game. DePue's girlfriend was making sandwiches in a suburban kitchen.
The environments were utterly mundane.
Yet they served as the staging ground for a fugitive hunt. The administrative veil that separates civil society from predatory behavior is incredibly thin, and it only holds because we collectively agree to maintain it.
That collective agreement is fragile. And as we finalize the analysis, it is essential to revisit the psychology documented in those 17 letters.
Right, the letters.
The grievance, the projection, the absolute certainty of his own victimhood, these are not merely symptoms of his guilt. They are the engine of his violence.
They are what fueled him.
The most dangerous aspect of a perpetrator like Dennis DePue is the complete absence of internal villainy. He did not view his actions as an atrocity. He viewed them as a necessary correction to a system that had unfairly stripped him of his authority.
The capacity to rewrite reality to justify cruelty is the defining thread of the coercive controller.
It truly is.
The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that illusion is staggering. As we close this exploration, we must recognize that a single deceptive phone call, an attempt to use the bureaucracy of the state to hide a murder, delayed the truth by mere hours.
But it couldn't stop it.
No. He believed he could manipulate the macro system of law enforcement just as effectively as he had manipulated the microsystem of his household. But the sheer volume of his violence outpaced his ability to manage the data. The combined courage of a traumatized family and observant strangers dismantled his localized insurgency.
The truth came out.
The physical reality of the evidence was simply too loud to be buried beneath an abandoned schoolhouse. Next time, we examine the disappearance of Antoinette Cayedito, a young girl who answered a knock at the door in the middle of the night and was never seen again.